here, bills are flying fast and furious. I'm happy to take questions on all those, but before I do, I just wanna highlight this week, perhaps more than any other, demonstrates just how deeply disconnected this entire Capitol Hill complex in Nashville is from the lives of people in Tennessee. Like, there are families that are trying to figure out if they can go on spring break right now, or just people who are trying to figure out how they're gonna continue commuting to work, who are seeing $1 higher gas prices than they saw a month ago with no end in sight. We know that the price of diesel is also making inflation across the board go up. They came out this week showing that 50% of the spending in the economy right now is coming from the top 10% of people. So our families are getting squeezed from every side with no relief in sight, and this legislature is not focused on anything that has any chance of helping that. We've talked about everything but how to help people this week, and it's the same old sort of tired culture war stuff. We're talking about transgender issues and counting, collecting data on immigrant populations, legislating what can happen in doctor's offices, making it easier to fire university professors they don't like. I mean, give me a break. And when there are actually legislating on something that might have a real effect in the world, it's to make it easier for wealthy families to deduct money that they're contributing to private schools, to wipe out the accountability metrics that would apply to those private schools, or to make it easier for like a gas company to fight back against a citizen who might sue them. I mean, the degree of disregard for human beings that's actually happening up here is astounding. And I'm not sure if Representative Clemmons knew what he walked into, but I mean, we've both been here a number of years, and I'm not going to speak for him, but the degree to which we are empowering the government to screw over people this year is it's disgusting. We are actively letting the government get away with just punishing people without any rights, without any ability to get relief. This is stuff that my conservative Republican colleagues used to be against. Not that long ago, there were people who were people of principle on the other side who would have stood against the sort of accumulation of power and the just use of that power to support nothing but powerful special interests. That's what's happening right now. And I wish it weren't the case, but I think that is really the story that unites the 785 bills that got considered in about 3 or 4 minutes each this week. But just the quality of work product, the degree of care that is being given the legislation right now is pretty minimal, and we are doing some stuff that's going to do some real damage to the state. I'll let Representative Clemmons deliver hopefully a more constructive message than that, but and then we'll take some questions.
Ditto, I guess. Yeah, I mean, we stand here today, and we're about to start the fast forward part of the legislative session, and we've yet to do anything to benefit people across the state of Tennessee and improve their lives, just like we talk about every week. We're seeing gas prices just skyrocket. The increased prices in oil and transportation costs are going to result in increased grocery prices, prices across the board in every household product. And when one party controls every branch of government at this federal and this state level, there's only one party to blame. While we're down here trying to talk sense to folks and try to actually get them to remember what they once stood for, the state budget is imploding, and people's lives aren't getting any better. It's really frustrating. I mean, we're seeing a lot of bills, not only that deprive people of their access to justice, they're decreasing transparency, they're limiting your rights, they're putting more mandates on public schools and not requiring any transparency or accountability to private schools that are receiving really creating a really problematic environment up here. And again, we have real problems across the state of Tennessee. People need healthcare, people need better roads, people need better access to transportation and quality public schools. And that's, if you find that anywhere on the agenda, the top 100 bills that are being passed by the Republican majority this year, let me know, because I'd love to support them. We'll take any questions.
This Senate Education Committee, and y'all both referenced this, passed Majority Leader Johnson's bill that would drop the TCAP requirement from the ESA. He says it doesn't drop it, but it would no longer be required in ESA accepting private schools. Obviously, I think that's something that you'll probably both oppose, but I was wondering if one or both of you could sort of speak to the tension that public schools in recent years have faced increasing accountability tied to TCAP scores. Accountability hearings start next week at the Senate the State Board of Education for schools that have been scored rated a D or F, which is specifically tied to TCAP. I'm thinking of third grade reading retention, all of these measures that often Republicans are touting as successful in raising education scores across the state, but now an increasing amount of public dollars are being funneled to private schools, which will not have these accountability measures. Do you have concerns about sort of dueling systems of education in Tennessee and sort of the contradiction of what the trajectory has been in recent years in Tennessee?
Well, it's an absolute crock, right? I mean, what they're saying is, like, the accountability metrics are used by the state only as an excuse to punish public schools and as an excuse to put them in private schools, which aren't subject to the same requirements at all. So they don't know if there's actual improvement. Like, they're just using the testing regimes as a hammer to encourage and facilitate people exiting public schools and going to private schools where they fundamentally do worse on these tests. I mean, every state, look, if any state's data showed that kids were performing better once they took a voucher and enrolled in a private school, they would not be getting rid of that requirement. But they know what the results are because we've already seen it in Tennessee. The kids who take these vouchers are doing worse than they were doing the year before, and almost universally doing worse than their peers, and they don't want to admit, and they don't want the taxpayers to know that they're diverting hundreds of millions of dollars so kids get a worse education in the private system. But that's what's happening.
Yeah, I think there's two ways to look at it, both on the education policy side, on the fiscal responsibility side. On the education side, they've obviously put in these incredible barriers for teachers, more burdens on teachers to get their jobs. We expect teachers to solve every problem that every child enters a schoolhouse with these days, and then hold that teacher accountable for them, whether for their pay or whether for their LEA's funding, which is inherently unfair and not a way to run the system. You also would increase, any education policy should be designed theoretically to improve educational outcomes. When you have no way of measuring educational outcomes with the investment of your tax dollars, that's problematic in and of itself. And we have no data, as Senator Yarbro said, to show that those outcomes are improving. So why didn't we pass those education policies to begin with? So that's a very backwards way of approaching policy. On the fiscal responsibility side, it's really problematic. We obviously have made our opposition to vouchers very clear for many reasons. But when you take public tax dollars that we have to be responsible stewards, we have a fiscal duty to protect and spend wisely, we have no idea how they're being spent. We have no idea if they're being spent for the benefit of the children, for the benefit of our local economies, because there's no measurement. There's no metrics that are telling us, in a year, it's going to be $1 billion of tax dollars. $1 billion of those tax dollars, are we getting a return on the investment? We have no way of knowing. That's fiscal irresponsibility of legislators to pass laws and spend money in that manner, where you're just basically throwing money into the wind, hoping it lands in the right hands for the right purpose with the right outcome. That is fiscally irresponsible. That's not how you're supposed to govern with education policy or handling people's tax dollars.
And your question actually hits on something else. Like, we are creating two fundamentally different systems. One where the vouchers are entirely funded by the state government, but the public schools are increasingly funded by the locals. The the public schools are subject to these testing, these requirements, these teacher accountability metrics, and the private schools are totally free of those requirements. The private schools have these new tax advantages that were adopted at the federal level, and that we passed legislation for in the Senate today to increase like the amount of private donations that are going to private schools, and there's no commitment to do the same for public schools. And so, I mean, I think we really are seeing sort of a deep divide, and one that should be worrying to anybody that pays property taxes in any county in the state of Tennessee.
Sorry to monopolize, but Speaker Sexton said in response to a similar question today that he thinks public schools should be allowed to not take TCAP and to choose whatever nationally norm reference test they wanted. But what's your response to that? I mean,
I think it's probably within the scope of that bill. He could probably offer that amendment on the floor. I think he's got capacity to do that.
Well, we just passed a caption bill out of a subcommittee with nothing in it this week, so he certainly can do whatever he wants at this point. They're certainly doing whatever they want. But yeah, I mean, we've been arguing for years to reduce standardized testing on our students. We certainly want a way to make sure that we're investing in our public schools is having a positive impact. And so we need to measure whether they're, having improving their educational outcomes, just like I said previously. But any manner in which we want to reduce standardized testing so that teachers can do their job, rather than teaching to a test, they can test what they teach and what they should be teaching. That'd be fantastic, but look, they control state government, they do whatever they want.
The Ten Commandments bill passed in the Senate today. It mandates the Ten Commandments. Very different than the one in the House, right? How do you think this one is more problematic than the one that is passed in the House? I mean, both of them have its differences.
Legislators up here need to spend more time trying to follow the Ten Commandments and less time trying to get them posted in all the schools, first of all. But second of all, like creating sort of mandate to put religious texts into schools is just entering culture and litigation wars to earn brownie points with a tiny slice of sort of an ideological motivated electorate. And like what most people want is them to put dollars into their schools, to help teachers in their school. They want nurses into their school. They want mental health care into their schools. They want, like better food and better options and better classes and better opportunities for their kids. They're not looking for the state to indoctrinate them one way or the other. Like most parents want to raise their kids and teach them right from wrong, and for a lot of us in Tennessee, that involves the Ten Commandments in Christianity. For some of us, it doesn't. But most of us know that they could, take moral lessons from better people than the folks that are working in this capital.
Oh, you have seen this in other states, and when that happens, of course, we've also seen them take litigation up, just as you mentioned. But how likely do you think is it that taxpayers will end up paying for a legal fight over this?
I mean, like, it's inevitable that taxpayers will end up paying for litigation for any number of bills that we're passing this session. I mean, there are numerous bills that have had preambles describing how they're basically being passed in order to go challenge things that are unconstitutional right now. And so, I mean, like, it's better to pass laws than lawsuits, but like this legislature has been passing lawsuits, constantly in the last few years. And I think they have an attorney general that's playing along with that. And like, we're just doing a lot of things that are unconstitutional, and like, they're interesting to talk about and fight about, but what they don't do is improve anybody's life. Like, you're not gonna find any parent or family that is like happier with their public schools next year because somebody's painted a copy of the Ten Commandments in the lobby if they're not getting the education that they need, if they're not getting the help they need. And maybe we should focus on stuff that matters.
It's fascinating, we're pulling library books out of schools, but we're putting the Ten Commandments on the walls. I mean, that's not what, that's not the system is designed for. And it's also interesting when you talk about the litigation, look at the bills they're passing that Senator Yarbro and I have been yelling about nobody seems to be listening, what they're doing to try to rig the judicial system in their favor when those laws are challenged. And this year alone, they've limited discovery on those lawsuits. They've passed a law for interlocutory appeals as of a right. And, you know, it's just, they're really trying to rig the system from every angle, knowing that they keep losing these lawsuits because they keep passing unconstitutional legislation. So I think everybody needs to step back and look at the macro problem here of how this is playing out.
Leader Johnson added an amendment to the bill that would create a new source of authority and board over the Music City Group. What do you kind of think about this new amended version?
I mean, I mean, we're still working through the amendment. So the starting point is the first bill that was offered on the Music City Loop that passed through several committees, by party line votes, was one of the most terrifying pieces of legislation I've ever seen. It basically was just a gift-wrapped, set of promises to a private company from the government with the company bearing no risk. And so it just put, the public was bearing all of the risk and getting very little benefit in return. The new amendment makes some moves that are towards a little bit of accountability, but they're, right now, I only see them as kind of paper promises. I mean, so the new amendment, for instance, would require the boring company to indemnify private companies or public, entities for damages they cause, or to deal with remediation but if they don't have the funds to do so, the state's left holding the bag. I mean, the taxpayers are ultimately responsible here, and just because a company is owned by a billionaire does not mean that that company has enough capital to cover all its losses, and we're not, the state isn't applying the same rules that it would when it buys pencils, right? Like if you buy a computer, if the state buys a computer, like it's gonna make sure that the company has a bond in place. Like they have to establish their credit, they have to agree to certain things to make sure that the state's interests are protected and that nobody's harmed. Like this legislation doesn't do any of that. And so it still has a long way to go before anyone should feel comfortable with it.
Do you still have concerns about, I'm hearing you mention the committee about first responders being able to respond to any accidents or anything like that?
Yeah, we could do an entire press conference on the boring company thing. The way that legislation is drafted presently, it gives a private company sovereignty, like the ability to control a space. The police would have to ask the private company's permission to respond to an emergency. So like if someone was calling 911 on their way into the tunnel, unless the boring company's executives approve the local emergency response, I guess we're just relying on Tesla and boring company employees to handle whatever emergency response is down there. That's ridiculous. I mean, like I don't think you can find an example of any law that's like that anywhere in the Tennessee code, probably not in any code in any state, because that's just not how law works in America. So, it's kind of shocking that this legislation wasn't just written on the boring company stationery, right? I mean, it's really as one side of a piece of bill as I've seen.
Yeah, I don't know how it's been amended or set aside, but I want to very clearly emphasize what he's pointing out. If you're having an emergency in a tunnel and you call 911, the 911 operator is going to have to say, hold on, let us call the boring company to get permission to respond to this emergency. Or let them respond. And I don't know that the boring company has an emergency response team. I don't know what that looks like. I've never heard of that. So you have to wonder, why is that language in there to begin with? And why would you want to put that hurdle into That is just one example of a larger bill that totally makes no sense whatsoever. I mean, it's problematic on multiple levels.
Senate Bill 836 got rolled to next Thursday, but a version of it passed in the House, which is the undocumented immigrant students bill. Now, the version in the House got kind of knocked down to just a tracking bill, but do you think that this is still a problem?
Yeah, absolutely, on multiple levels. We know what their aim is here. Their aim is to challenge Plyler. That's the goal, regardless of how the bill is written or amended. That's the challenge. And then also, we should all be concerned with what they're gonna do with that data. I mean, we all see what's happening across this country. We all see how people are being targeted in my district, Jeff's district. So anything of this nature is problematic and concerning on multiple levels. And we all know why it's, again, to charge Plyler, and set that up. I mean, this was designed strategically with the permission and at the instruction of Stephen Miller, straight out of the White House. So we know it has a very devious purpose. There's a nefarious purpose to it. So never lose sight of that, regardless of how these bills are amended. I think that's very important to keep in mind.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, this bill isn't better, it's just more cynical, right? I mean, as opposed to actually having a rule that would say if you're not documented, you're not allowed to enroll in school, this says, we just need your documentation and we're gonna send it to immigration and enforcement. I mean, regardless of which way you're going about this, they're trying to target the people who are least responsible for the immigration problem with the consequences of it. And I mean, I don't know there's not a moral tradition in the world that blesses punishing children like this bill would do. But that's what it's intended to do. It is intended to scare families who absolutely have a right to attend school, who pay taxes to support schools, from being able to enroll. I mean, that's what it's designed to do, and that's what they're trying to test. And so, I mean, yeah, it remains deeply offensive and deeply cynical.
Yeah, I mean, I would just add, we're already seeing rampant absenteeism across the school system right now because children are afraid to come to school. They're afraid they're gonna get picked up by a masked agent of some sort on the way to school, because a lot of my students walk to their local elementary school, or they're afraid their parents aren't gonna be there when they come home. So children are not going to school already. Imagine what impact this would have on the fear and intimidation and the impact it would have on these children and their teacher. I mean, we're creating adverse childhood experiences with legislation. That's not what we're supposed to be doing. Targeting innocent children. Again, as I said on the House floor, when this came before us for a vote, the work that needs to be done is in Washington, D.C. We have a broken immigration system. Fix the problem in D.C. That's what we elect federal officials to do. Roll up your sleeves, do the work, have the tough discussions and debate, and pass immigration reform. Instead of doing that, the party that controls every branch of federal government, every branch of Tennessee government, is coming to the state level and targeting families and innocent children. That's how they're addressing a broken immigration system. That's inherently and fundamentally wrong on multiple levels.
And let's also be clear. I mean, there have been a lot of times in history when governments have started collecting data on individuals who are members of unpopular groups. Those are never bright chapters in any history. Like, it never leads to something that a country is ultimately proud of. You cannot find an example in the history of the world where that goes well for a country, and we shouldn't be going down that road.
Anything else?
Right, there you go.
Thanks.